This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Dance program. Tonight we're lucky enough to have Carolyn Lucas, Associate Artistic Director of the Trisha Brown Dance Company, and Jamie Scott, a member of the Trisha Brown Company. Carolyn was here today looking at sites around campus for a program that we're going to do in the spring called In Plain Sight, where they take some of Trisha Brown's work and they do them as site-specific works in new places. So she was here looking at spaces for that. And Jamie's here setting a piece of Trisha Brown's called Solo Olos. And we're going to hear more about those things later. But I thought since some of us are new to Trisha Brown and some of us are not, I would do a quick little cliff notes on Trisha Brown. There will be misspellings and that sort of thing. So here we go. Trisha grew up in Aberdeen, Washington, and was sporty as a kid. Lots of running around and tree climbing, that sort of thing. She also took tap, ballet, and acrobatic dance. I want to know what that is. And she attended Mills College, where she graduated, and then she would attend the American Dance Festival during those years as well, where she took from Louis Horst, who was a really important composition teacher at the time. Louis Horst was Martha Graham devotee, really her partner, and also from Merce Cunningham. So that was kind of Trisha's first introduction to Merce Cunningham and his ideas and Cage's ideas. She spent 2 years studying with Anna Halpern in San Francisco, who is probably kind of an unsung person when it comes to dance history. We often think of the New York, kind of New York-centric thing with Cunningham and Cage and Robert Dunn, but all those folks also hung out with Anna Halpern, and she was doing important work. She was really interested in improvisation, which was kind of a new thing for Trisha and for the others at that time. She moved to New York in 1961. She was encouraged to do that by Yvonne Rainer and Simone Forti. And they all started taking classes at the Merce Cunningham studio, these composition classes from Robert Dunn, who was a John Cage student. So when we're talking about John Cage, we're talking about aleatory structures, about chance chance compositions, and things like that. So that whole class was based on those ideas of chance, structure, and games. So from that class, the Judson Church emerged. These were a group of choreographers in the early 60s who were all taking Robert Dunn's classes, and they started working in the basement of the Judson Church. They all started creating work. The works really defied all expectations of dance at the time. No costumes. No, we're not going to do costumes. We're not going to do narrative. We're not going to do dance steps. We're not going to do it in a theater. We're going to do it outside. We're going to do it in a different place. Everything had changed. They were really asking questions about what dance is and where it belongs. So she was a really important figure in that, along with choreographers such as Yvonne Rainer, Lucinda Childs, Simone Forti, David Gordon, Steve Paxton. This is a picture of Trisha Brown and Steve Paxton. Interestingly enough, sometimes they attribute this piece to Trisha, and sometimes they attribute it to Steve. I think it's probably Trisha's. Because, you know, Steve, it would be an improv. So, after her time with Judson, she had kind of two kind of big cycles of different kinds of work. One was the equipment pieces. These were pieces that always required some sort of equipment to defy gravity or celebrate gravity. So, man walking down the side of the building. Maybe you saw that as you were sitting here, which is exactly that: a man walking down the side of the building. Walking on the wall. This is the Whitney Museum, and they created this track system that allowed the dancers to walk on the wall. Floor of the forest. You can see this picture here. It's like a grid of ropes, and within the ropes they have shirts and pants and things like that intertwined. And so the dancers would put on those clothes as they were going through that maze of ropes. spiral is a piece in which there's a spiral rope going down a tree, and the dancers simply go along that spiral. And then roof piece, which is a piece that was set in Lower Manhattan, where the dancers would kind of semaphore their movements from one rooftop to another, and it was kind of like a telephone game, yeah? So they'd see if they could get it back, yeah? You guys, again, you guys can totally tell me if I'm wrong. At the same time, she was doing an accumulation series, so one piece, or one movement, another movement. Movement 1, movement 2, movement 1, 2, 3, movement 1, 2, 3, 4, movement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And so there was accumulation in 1972, group primary accumulation in 1973, solo olos, which is what we're learning in 1976, water motor, and then finally water motor is this amazing piece that I can't imagine. Someone asked why it was called water motor, and I was like, what else could you call that? I mean, it's just so liquid and yet mechanical at the same time. And then she did accumulation plus water motor and talking, where she splices accumulation with water motor, and then she's telling a couple stories at the same time. It's a pretty amazing piece just to imagine her keeping it all in her brain like that. In 1979, it was the first time she created a piece for the stage, which is kind of interesting because at that point she was actually kind of a famous choreographer. She was known all around the world, really, at least in Europe and America, and yet this was the first time she had created a piece specifically for the stage. And that's Glacial Decoy. What's exciting about this, let's see if I can find it, is that in 1979, the Trisha Brown Dance Company performed here at Emory University. And one of the pieces they did was Glacial Decoy. So in 1979, it was Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis that actually commissioned the piece, but she performed it here at what some of you know as the Mary Gray Monroe. At the time, it was called the AMA, what does that stand for?
Alumni Memorial University Center.
Yeah. And actually, Susan, you were there, right? Susan Eldrin actually saw that show, and she's the one who gave me this really great program. So it's really exciting that we're seeing this come back. And also, interestingly enough, that same week, Martha Graham performed at the Fox Theater.
Wow.
So, pretty great. Did you also go to that, Susan? No. Why would you? So, I'm going to move this out of the way. If you guys wouldn't mind just telling us your relationship to the company and your relationship to Trisha as I take care of that.
Yeah. My name is Carolyn Lucas. I joined the Trisha Brown Company in 1984. I was a dancer in the company for 10 years. In 93, 94, I transitioned to being Trisha's choreographic assistant and continued that position with her until her retirement. And currently myself and Diane Madden are the associate artistic directors of the company. So.
My name is Jamie, and I joined the company in 2012. So I've been there as a dancer for the last 5 years, and recently doing a little more teaching and dipping my toe in the staging pot. So.
Thanks, guys. I have so many questions, it's hard to know where to start. I'm going to start with this one. I like to think of choreographers as being in camps. And I have two kind of camps: choreographers who are interested in choreographic devices, ideas. I have something written down here: elements, time and space, devices such as repetition, canon, reversing, retrograde. as opposed to choreographers who are interested more in movement invention and vocabulary. But I feel like Trisha does a really interesting and amazing job of both of those things. And I was wondering, actually that's just a long lead-in to say, could you describe a little bit of how would you describe her movement vocabulary? Because it has influenced so many people and so many generations of dancers. So what is the Trisha Brown look?
Generally there's an idea that we hear from audience that it looks fluid and is with great ease. But in fact, it is incredibly physically challenging. That's my answer to the look. But I think one thing that's really extraordinary about Trisha and her, it's actually she said, she didn't ever say like this, you know, it's vocabulary. Her movement vocabulary developed from her exploration of something that's really stripped down of connotation. And I think even though she was an extraordinarily gifted and talented physical dancer, she dared to go back to the basics and explore things. I've just been reading about Trillium. It was just based on lying down, sitting down, and standing up. But Trisha was so exploratory that she just worked those three instructions to the point where apparently, you know, she would be levitating, like lying down in the air, because she just repeated and found and found. And that was something that over all the years that I worked with her, and the story of every dancer that I've known, is that we're always, it's pretty amazing to work with a person who is so persistently exploring and has created her own movement vocabulary that is unlike any other movement vocabulary on earth. You do not see her movement coming from any other place. And just to also try to say that from when I joined the company, she was building the Valiant cycle. So she was building Newark, which was really high-octane physical movement vocabulary. But what she would do is she would have something in mind that she was interested in for a certain cycle, and she would explore it till it was just exhausted. And then she would just start anew. So as a dancer, we never even repeated a movement from one piece to another. It was a constant, fresh vocabulary, which was outstanding. It was always so interesting and so gratifying to come in the studio and just things that you could never imagine just continually unfolding.
Jamie, I know that you danced for Cunningham for a while before you danced for Trisha, so can you talk a little bit about maybe how that feels different in the body?
Sure. I guess for me, there is definitely something that I recognize in dancers, in Trisha's company and other dancers, about movement and sort of energetic impulse and like volume of movement, volume of effort that I wanted to explore. And I saw that in Trisha's work, and I saw that that would be a place where I could develop a broader sort of sense of the value of big and small and fast and slow and hard and soft. It's sometimes I go back and forth between the two worlds a lot now, and sometimes it's all just movement. I try to simplify it. It's all just movement. But there is, I feel like in Trisha's work, this immense specificity and architecture, but it like never settles, and it's always tumbling into something else. So it's really hard to hold on to that. Is like a constant challenge, and I feel like you have to relive it every day over and over and over again to even grasp what it is.
Carolyn, you when we were watching that video of accumulation and water motor and talking, you're sitting in the background as a 20-something, and Jamie just explained why she was attracted to Trisha Brown's work. Was there a moment where you're like, oh, I have to dance for Trisha?
There sure was. I had been trained in ballet. It wasn't my forte, ballet. I appreciate it, but I spent my childhood on horses, and so I just was really turned in, you know, it just wasn't the thing for me to do. But I spent a lot of time on that horse in nature, and a lot of time in the forest, and went through high school performing arts, went to Purchase, and I had really liked, as a student, composition class. And in my composition class, there was a continuing education student. To me at the time, she seemed to be, well, she was a more mature woman. And she approached me and said, I'd love to take you to see Trisha Brown in New York City at Brooklyn Academy of Music. And it was 1981. I was 19, I think. 19? Yeah. And I could not believe what I was seeing, because I had, you know, I loved to dance, and I really appreciated modern dance companies. I danced with Ramon when I was in college, but I didn't feel that I was going to settle in modern dance, and thought I might do my own work. And when I saw just the movement alone, it was Son of Gone Fishing, Opal Loop, and Glacial Decoy. I was like, this is it. And I was so young and so taken by the movement quality itself that I don't even think I was even able to digest the choreography, because I was just mesmerized. And I was really lucky, because I actually had the opportunity to audition for the company in a workshop situation right after college. But I mean, it's a really good thing that I got to that performance at such a young age, because it continued to inspire me through school. So it was a big event in my life.
That's really great. Take young people to see choreographers. There's a lesson there for all of us. So yeah, I was thinking I was mostly talking about her early work during this little moment. I mean, really up until 1981, and there has been so much since then. But because that's what I would describe as legitimate history now, that there has been enough writing about it and enough contemplation and enough documentation that that's the work that we're most familiar with. And I was wondering if one or both of you could talk about a cycle that you found very intriguing about her in her later work, and what was different about it, and what remains the same, or what was something that continued from the other works.
Well, my entry was actually similar to yours in the Valiant cycle, because I started, I think right when I came in, we were doing new work. And it was, or as you remember it, yeah, and it was for me coming from, the Valiant cycle refers to more, yeah, like Carolyn said, the more athletic, robust works, and coming from Cunningham right into the work, it felt like a clear access point for me. And I love that. So actually, the opposite for me was going back. When I had to go back and relearn the earlier stable molecular stuff, I felt like I was swimming in like amorphous movement land, and I could not like make heads from tails. I didn't know what I was supposed to be feeling. I didn't know what I was supposed to be looking like. It took me a very long time to dig through the layers of that and find that there is still like that same amount of specificity, but in a very different way. So I have grown to really love that work, but it was a challenge for me to get in there.
Didn't take care that long. Yeah, but I think Trisha would sort of respond to herself in a certain way. So she was making these, the first cycle that was named was the unstable molecular cycle. So she was really just a certain kind of movement vocabulary that was more fluid, although there is a lot of architecture within that vocabulary. Very jointed, and she would be working like opal, sun gone fishing is, you can do the phrase on the right side, the left side, you can go forward, you can go backward. And then she takes two groups and they build along. I'm just kind of doing it really quickly. Opal loop, basic phrases. Then they start to improvise together, looping and set and reset, basic phrases. Wall 1, wall 2, wall 3, wall 4, improvising within these walls, and then her building center sections just to, as conveyor belt, because she was working with the perimeter. I think even in Glacial Decoy, Trisha's constantly, one thing that stays with her the whole time is that she's constantly redefining how we see the proscenium stage by taking away the winds or her collaborations with these extraordinary artists. Valiant series, she was like, okay, I think I'm through that. And there's the story of her and her research, because she also researched movement vocabulary on her own. And there are stories of her just really wanting to find material that would work for the male body specifically, very sculptural. She's like starts pushing her furniture around the house, and these positions of just like tabletop, like just finding these beautiful geometries just through exploring, like pushing her own furniture around the apartment. So she constructed this beautiful male duet, and the women have a vocabulary, kind of buzz bombs, she wanted to say. But she also was very interested in aerial material at that part. And you have two couples, and there's a male role and a female role that are in unison. And so you have the women lifting the men, and the men lifting the women. It forays off at times to not being it's not the same thing the whole way through, but that was the focus. Aerial work is always something that she explored. And then she made another very valiant piece, Astral Convertible, and then she sort of goes like, we're all going like, could you make an easier piece now? Because we're exhausted touring dancers. And she went back to zero. And she was really exploring vocabulary before, it's called subconscious movement for her. something of finding a gesture before you actually think about it, so that it has its own distinct quality without story or connotation, but it might have some sort of emotional resonance for people, but it's not telling you something specifically. And she kind of explored that vocabulary for another cycle. But one of the things that was beautiful about all that exploration of this certain kind of gestures, I think that when she was invited into the opera world, that came back tenfold for her. When she was making movement for opera singers and actually literally having them dance, but it was a beautiful example was when she was building the aria Messaggera in Orfeo. She used this one part of her dancer mind to build something completely geometric on one side of the body, and then one side of the body was sort of gesturing something that was emotionally evocative of the poetry or the libretto. But it's not saying, I want you to experience grief, or yeah, it's sort of, her evolution is just, it's impossible to describe, but I think what's the most incredible thing is her exploration. She never rested or felt comfortable with what she had achieved. And it all adds up in the end, which is incredible. Because you go back to the early work and the clarity of it, her love of structure. When you said water motor, and why would that be titled water motor? Yes, because of the amazing, wild, fluid movement, but Trisha also used to speak of creating structure as a motor. So she'd be like, I've got to find my motor. And that motor for her would be a system or a structure that would actually generate movement vocabulary and ideas.
What, there's always these stories, you hear stories from old Graham dancers or about how crazy Graham was and what the feel of the studio was like. And we've already talked about that the Trisha Brown Dance Company, there's no ego in the room. But I'm wondering, what was it like to be in the studio with Trisha on a daily basis? Was there a lightheartedness to it? Was it like a very serious kind of, we're going to get down to work kind of thing? All of it? I'm just kind of curious.
Trisha was extremely serious, but she was incredibly lighthearted and funny, and she had so much wit. And I think she was always extremely prepared and so interested in what the day would bring. It was always wonderful because in some of these systems, she would just set people on a collision course, literally, and be like, okay, I want to make a turnstile. And so, Diane, I want you to run on a diagonal, do a grand jeté in the middle, and Lance and Will, I want you to run at her and bat her legs so she spins in the air, and they would do it. But, I mean, we trusted her ideas because we, as physically smart and architectural and every smart, thing about Trisha was within the idea. We never felt like she would ask us to do anything dangerous or something she didn't believe in, but she also, her very spunky, very daring woman who walked down the side of the building, or put somebody walking down the side of the building. She was courageous, and not afraid to try things, but they were always well thought out. And yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer, but
That's a great answer.
I think she challenged herself, she challenged us, and it was engaging. So we were very engaged every moment. And people, Trisha worked very hard to advocate for dancers to have full-time salaries. She wanted her dancers full-time. She wanted us to have health insurance. She wanted us to have dental insurance. And she worked so hard to do this in the evening. It was very, very important that she felt like she was doing the right thing. And that also comes around when you have someone that you're working for that really is advocating for your position in the world, being respected. It feels good. So it's a really good environment. And she did good. You know, she wanted things too. So she was also, I wouldn't say a perfectionist, but she was really, the clarity of her work was really important. So whenever we had something in unison, I mean, we would be drilled so that our pinky was, you know, at a certain point. I mean, she wanted her work to be, when it was formal to her, or pristine form, we would be pristine within the form. If it was something wilder, she would just wish us the wildest ride. So we rehearsed a lot, and we worked really, really hard. So even though there was this sense of fluidity and, oh, it looks like they're improvising, every single second of that was crafted with total precision. So.
We have a rehearsal after this at 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna move along. But I wanted to start with Jamie. Could you talk a little bit about Solo Olos, about your relationship with it, about the piece? That's the piece that she's setting on the Emory Dance students that you'll get to see in November. I've been in the rehearsal, and it's yeah, it's hard.
I need my whiteboard for
Oh yeah, that's right.
Solo is a palindrome, so as the title implies, there's an element of going forward and going backwards. So the piece is, I'll just give you the structure really quick. It's composed of one phrase called the main phrase, and the dancers start at the beginning of the main phrase, and they continue moving forward in direction, and when they get to the end of it, they retrograde and they do everything backwards. And they just run back and forth on this track. And there's two little parallel tracks that come off at a certain point. Another phrase called branch and another one called spill. And those also, you know, it's like a little turn off on the highway, but then it joins back into turns back into Main Street. And then if you're going backwards, you could take the same turn and end at the front of Main Street. So there's a caller in the piece composing the space and the dance live. And he begins with the dancer steps out, sits down, and as they're dancing, calls them into phrases according to what they're seeing in the space, what they'd like to see, calls reversals, sends dancers back in other directions. So eventually you have 4 units moving in the space with this mastermind in the front sort of putting it all together live. And the piece only ends when the caller can get them all back in unison at the beginning of the main phrase. It sounds very, it's hard to visualize. It's amazing that she was able to visualize it. I mean, when you're learning it, it's like, how does someone think of this structure and time it out so precisely that they knew the system would always deliver a certain piece. I learned that piece several years into my time at the company, and I think we had just done some fishing, which was for me like the most challenging piece to learn. It was the most, like I said, the most amorphous, the farthest away from all of my natural movement inclinations, And not only was the movement difficult, but you had to learn the movement forwards and backwards, and then on the right side and on the left side, and then you had to learn this huge form, which was the dance in its forward version. So group form, if you think like you walk down the street, you bump into a person, you cross the street, you trip and fall, you stand up, you tie your shoe, and then you sit down. But then you had to do all of those interactions backwards. So you stand up from sitting down, untie your shoe, untrip, all of that stuff had to happen. You still have to see the same people in passing on the same way. So that's learning a form forward and then learning a form backwards. So in Sundown fishing, you do that. You're going forwards, and then all of a sudden the whole thing turns around and goes backwards as a company. Reconstructing that was like going through the ringer. I mean, no one knew how we were going to get through it. And you're watching 6 very unique dancers who improvised this structure in what year was Sundown fishing? 80, I think. 79 or 80. So our bodies are very different. Our movement experiences are very different. So then the next piece we were doing was solo olos, and we were all like, oh my gosh, here we go again. We're going to be like reversing movement, and now not only is it not set, but we have to respond to the collar in the moment. Anyway, for some reason, having done Sundown fishing right before made it so much easier. And we were like, oh, this is great, we have this. So for me, solo olos was a very enjoyable process. Being in a dance and not knowing what's going to happen, but knowing that you are, no matter what, you're on a track. So you can just commit to that and then respond to the collar. It was really exciting. And then I also got to become the caller for the piece, which for me was like, I feel like none of us wanted to call because we all wanted to dance. And then when I stepped out to finally call, this is the best part because you're like the mastermind, the wizard behind the curtain, and it's really, really exciting to get to compose live. And your heart's a little bit racing. You're nervous because you know you have to land the plane, but you only have 12 minutes to do it, and you get there. So it's a really fun piece, and I'm glad that we're doing it here.
Last night, she was calling and I was dancing it. She said something like, everybody but Maggie reversed, and I was like, is that me? I don't know, am I everybody? What's going on? It's so hard, it's really a challenge, and lots of fun though. Am I
We tried to call it in Japanese once we were on Pillow. I speak some Japanese, so we were doing it in Kyoto, and Diane was like, well, can you call it in Japanese? And I was like, well, I can, but like, do you think the dancers are like that? Which one's reverse again? Which one's?
Yeah, hey, that's another layer of confusion. Can you, Carolyn, can you just talk a little bit about the history of In Plain Sight and the process that you go through when you do that show?
Yeah. In Plain Sight grew out of performing the early works, and there was a desire for it to develop to include repertory excerpts, because Trisha definitely, when she worked on one section of the choreography, she worked on it with the intensity of a whole choreography. So there's certain, you wouldn't just pull an excerpt from anywhere, but there's certain excerpts that really stand on their own and are stunningly beautiful, like certain duets or quartets or solos. And we also have 2 full repertory pieces now in Plain Sight. In Plain Sight is, I think it's site-specific, but generally site-specific is something where you come to a site and you create something specifically for that site. So In Plain Sight is basically off the proscenium stage. And so we have people who would like us to perform in a museum or outdoors or in a black box, or so many requests, and you just go to the space. We have an inventory. We have to take care with surface, so we're not going to ask our dancers to do big leaps on concrete floors or do certain things on grass that would not be good for their joints. So there's always a little bit of some limitation, which is actually fantastic, because that limitation gets you to think really hard about what you're doing, and there's a real desire to be in dialogue with the environment, to make the environment and the choreography to try to find the place where something has the most resonance. And also to be very conscious of how the audience will be able to see everything in an intimate situation. I don't know if I'm saying this very well. It's many, many, many things, but it's a total joy. One of the things that we found is that people, whether it's a museum or outdoors, enjoy a more intimate and less formal relationship to the work, because often the work is people feel that it's too complex on the stage, and so when we bring an excerpt of repertory, it sort of unwinds it for them, and they're like, oh my God, now I really understand this. Or the early works are so pristine, but they have such a sense of humor and wit with them that people enjoy that also, and sometimes just having the simplicity of an early work in juxtaposition of a repertory excerpt. Also, it gives an ability to see the work in a deeper way. That has been something that we felt would be a strong way of carrying Trisha's legacy forward. And it does relate back to something that she was very, very interested in, her beginnings, but it also takes her evolution along with it. So it's not just going back to the pieces that she did in the 70s, but it carries the whole range of her evolution and history to some degree. I mean, or it has range to it, which we think is really nice. So.
I think there's just like an element of when you're seeing very formal, non-narrative, often abstract work on stage. A lot of people come away feeling that it's cold or cool at least, and in plain sight has been a really nice way to reveal the interconnectedness of the dancers as well. Like when you're really close to them, you can see the attention to each other, the human side of dance, and I think it makes it much more accessible to people who are usually a little more standoffish in the theatrical setting.
Well, we're really so excited to have it here in spring. It's going to be the first weekend in April, so you can mark that on your calendars. I think it's Saturday at 2 and 4, and Sundays at 2. Sunday at 2. I'm not absolutely positive, but you all have the internet, so you'll be fine. Yeah.
I just want to add to this quickly. Is one of the really rewarding things about In Plain Sight is it's not that you're just coming somewhere and this is where you're going to perform and this is what you're going to do. You barely meet the lighting, or someone who's working in the theater. And In Plain Sight, it's really it's a team effort. So we've met all these people today, we've been to all these places, then you'll meet the people who are in charge of the building, and it just keeps going on and on and on as you you start to engage with people in a working environment that you don't normally get to bring people together like this and work like a team, and I love that.
Yeah, it's the closest I'm going to ever be to the artist Christo, where I have to convince people to let me do this dance in this space, you know. And I think actually Emory's going to be on board. I think they will. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but I really want to offer questions from the audience. Okay, great.
When Trisha Brown used music, did she have a way of responding to, or not responding, discovering pieces? How did she put music into her work?
In many different ways. I think her first choreography to music, she worked with Robert Ashley, and it was the piece Sun Gum Fishing was built in silence, and Ashley provided 9 pieces of music that they were alternated. They would choose, do you want Bud, Max, or Willard? And the dancers would be like, Willard, you know. And so that's interesting, you're aware of it and it affects you, but the dancers are completely conscious of their own rhythmic song, which enables them to make their connections with all the people, their appointments with all the other dancers within the Dance on Time. Set and Reset, Laurie Anderson, she would observe rehearsals and there would be videotapes passed back and forth, but the piece again is made in silence. But in this situation, they're landmarks, and music starts to enter the process, and the dancers keep their connections, but they start to establish landmarks in the music. So that's one way of developing the landmarks come into the rehearsal vocabulary. Like you're late on the cat sound, and so we have that system. Trisha has built pieces and studied scores intensely and librettos intensely, and there are pieces where some things are built in silence, some things are set, some things, the music is in the studio and it's set by what's most resonant or meaningful. There's a whole array of relationship to music, but when the music is really a part of the work, Trisha studies it very deeply, the score and the structure of the music.
How have you recorded, kept this going? Are all the pieces videotaped? Are they lab annotated or memory? Where is it being passed down? How's it being passed down?
There's an extensive archive. Trisha has taped every day of her rehearsals since the 80s. I have videotaped Trisha's work every day in rehearsal since 1994. And it's not possible, really, I mean, it's different. We do rely on videotape. It was easier when Trisha was present, or when there were more original, so maybe 1 or 2 new people are learning and video is incorporated. And we have the skill to work from video a lot, like a lot of people at once, but you live and you learn. And so we are making great efforts now to have more feedback from alumni and more alumni teaching. I'm trying to use video as an complementary. But you know, it's very fortunate to have that video, because even if an original person comes in and they see themselves building with Trisha, or they remember something of the root or of Trisha's rhythm in it, or it helps them too. And so Trisha was very much, she was really interested in the quality of, like, the first time something is discovered, the instinct within it, and she's even interested in that with rhythm. Like, there was a system at one point of, it was called throwing and catching, and she would dance, and you'd have your one chance, and you'd be like, you know, so you had to like see it and remember it visually, and also have a song for the rhythm. Like, you have to see the rhythm. And so there was that spontaneous or instinctive grasp, and she really loved that. So she was always going like, when it would start to get, if you did it over and over again for years, it would, you know, start to inflate. She was constantly trying to keep alive something. And it's also been wonderful to see too that there is a point also when new dancers need to bring their own instinct into that too, and to value it. So it's always a balance. So.
Laura?
I just wanted to know, because our training often doesn't include improvisation and building the skills, and how early and now, what you came into the company with, and also what you found in the structures that you created. What were, individually, what were the skills that you really felt like you gained or refined as an improviser?
Well, I came in with zero improvisation practice, coming from Cunningham. It was all set. So I was certainly nervous and apprehensive, because I didn't know how much that would be part of the environment, the working environment. And I have to say, like, I feel like learning her work, very little is actually improvised by the time it's set on stage. Like, there's almost none. But because it's built out of the improvisational process, in a way, I felt like it was a back door into improvisation, so I could kind of learn it through following different dancers' choices and different dancers' patterns in different pieces, sort of understanding, and through watching these amazing archives at the building process too, like analyzing their choices a little bit and then trying to do it along with them. So in a way, it was like training wheels into improvisation. And then we've tried, one amazing thing we've tried to do in a lot of reconstructions is, in order to not get so bogged down with, like, this is the set piece and you have to do it this way, playing with, learning the sentence, learning the phrases, and then being given the same tasks, and had time to just improvise in those structures with that same vocabulary for a little while. I feel like we did that with Opal Loop when we reconstructed it, and it was an amazing way to find that spirit of improvisation, and then be able to go in and learn set movement and try and like keep that alive, which is really a challenge, I think, in learning set repertoire. So that's something I feel like I've learned a lot in my experience there.
Yeah, I never had any experience in improvisation either in my training, but the instructions were so clear, and Trisha was so supportive, and she also, the instructions fueled your improvisation. Usually, like when I came in, they were short ideas to just go with the phrase material and a certain instruction, so you weren't trying to make up the movement that you were making choices with, which is a little different than improvisation. And she'd send you out with a task or an idea or a course or a direction, and you would just respond to what was there. So it was also instinctual. So she really did kind of pave the way for us to kind of live and explore inside her instructions and ideas. And it was lovely too. Sometimes she'd have a real idea, like, I want to tell you do this, do that. And sometimes she would have a direction, and we would go at it, and it would just go all amok. That something amazing would come out of it. You know, like somebody just crashed into somebody, but they didn't crash in a bad way, they crashed in a cool way. Like there was one time where it's like somebody bumped this way, that way, and that way. And we had to like then go back and reconstruct it. So we used video a little bit, you know, to try to find the imagery. So, and she would take short, the dance, you know, sometimes she was in the dance, which I never experienced, which I think would have been incredible, but set and reset, like they go a little way with the instruction, and she'd say, someone would say stop, and they go back and they try to reset what they just did, and then they go a little forward, and I think that that's how the dance got its name. But she was a leader, and she was leading us in our improvisation too. We could make choices, or sometimes it would be accidental.
Well, I'm very sorry, but we have to end this so we can get started with the rehearsal. I really want to thank you guys for doing this. And come see other stuff.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.